So if I could sum up this panel and really the intent, one, I thank you all for your willingness up here to answer. I would probably use a couple words. One would be pithy. We've got it's kind of the speed round of answers here to get to the point or put a solid point on both the environment and then solutions in order to onboard this technology more quickly. I find the title of this fascinating, and it's very fitting. And this is the idea of trying to achieve an operational level of superiority, whether you're on the battlefield or in the boardroom. The dilemmas, the problems, the thought process, compressing however you define the word targeting into something actionable at the speed of relevance is really the challenge and has been for quite some time. So as Meryl aptly put in the opening, we have these things at conflict right now. We have more data than we've ever had, most of which contains answers we need right now. But the time to sort through that data, to come up with something that's meaningful, and then to act on that information in a way that it prevents us from doing post-mortem types of orders issuances is really the trick here, right? It's about speed of relevance. And I would say that there was a time that this provided an advantage in its own right, those who had some level of automation or AI help or input. I would argue now it's a necessity. We've gone away from this idea of tactical advantage. You either have it or you're already behind. So with that, I'd like to jump in with our distinguished panelists here and ask the first question maybe in a very truncated way. Why now? Why all the urgency? We've been talking about this for over a decade, seriously, but what is the impetus at state at present?
Yeah, so the reason is we no longer have operational flexibility. So we've always been able to rely on that we are faster, bigger, and more able to respond to any threat anywhere in the world. But now when we have actors that can meet that same level that we can do, our timelines change drastically. So if we don't embrace AI and move faster than peer competitors, then we're going to lose out on conflicts. And so we have to get at this quicker because our peers will and our competitors will.
Yeah, I fundamentally agree that why and why now. Number one, the technology is ready. And we've reached this level of maturity where it's actionable and operational in a way that wasn't the case just 2.5, 3 years ago, or 2 years ago, or even 18 months ago. And then I think the point of speed is critically important. Our adversaries are there or ahead of us.
Couldn't agree more. I had the privilege of attending my 25-year reunion at the Naval Academy this weekend. Still have a lot of friends who are wearing the uniform. We were having conversations about this, and speed is the most important thing that is top of mind for them.
Yeah, I agree with everybody on the panel as well, but I think maybe the one piece I might click in is the comment you made on the technology readiness, right? I think more than anything at this point, we're looking at an opportunity where the technology has been democratized and it's absolutely ready for these types of problem sets, right? Moore's law has effectively been replaced by the scaling laws of AI and the power and the return that we will get on them. For anybody that's ever built an agent or done anything like that before, what Nikhil showed, 20 minutes ago, and what we saw with Master Sergeant Haskell is mind-blowing magic compared to what we'd be able to use to do with technology and AI 5 years ago. So we're on the precipice of what's ready and capable now, highly democratized, easily consumable, easily implementable.
So thank you. So Dan, let me start with you and ask a very pointed question about trust. So Major General George covered that in a previous panel. And trust is essential to making this work, especially, again, if we're talking about compressed timelines. So how do we get users to the idea of trust and verify?
Yeah.
If you're going to capitalize on this, but there's always this hanging cloud about whether or not the human is better, the machine is a good augmenter. How do you incorporate these things to get a better result?
Yeah, I've had the distinct privilege of being an operator first, and later in life jumped into the technology space. But every time I approach these kinds of problems, I am fundamentally trying to put myself in the shoes of the operators. What is important to them? The data, one of the great things about the generative AI explosion is it has exposed just how important the data foundation is. And those operators, they know that there are challenges with data quality, right? Because the folks who are creating data at the point of entry, they know it's not telling the entire story, right? So that early and often engagement with those operators, putting tools in front of them that they can interact with and poke holes at is the way forward in this space.
Comments?
I would just add that the exercises where AI pilots are being utilized are increasingly important. I was out in Indo-PACOM in Honolulu recently. We were talking about exercises, and the commanders can't use the term rehearsals, but they are. And until you get reps with whatever you're using, you won't build trust. It won't be reliable. And I would liken it to all of us in this room, those who are old enough to remember the advent of GPS. And you know, those of us who started out, you always had a hard copy map because it didn't make sense. But look at the trust that we've built up in our navigation systems every single day when we drive around here. We even ignore it, we just listen and we trust. Getting to that level of trust requires many, many more reps in exercises that are truly operationalized, that are more like rehearsals.
Yeah,
You clearly haven't been in the car when I've driven my 83-year-old dad to places that he knows very well. Apparently, he has not really a fondness of GPS, and we have some pretty spirited discussions about that, but appreciate it. You had a comment.
Yeah, I just, as you guys are bringing up these points, I think about my time as a maintainer in the Air Force, and often my thought is, what are the software developers going to do to me? Like, it was very rarely, what is a software developer for the Air Force going to do to help me out, although that's the hope. So if we do have a culture within the Air Force where we expect that the software is going to come out and not be fully optimized for us at our place in the mission. And so bringing those end users in and making sure they have this feedback to better optimize AI is super critical. Otherwise, adoption is just going to be incredibly slow.
Yeah.
I think there's an interesting point about that, the adoption and sort of the reps and practice, right? I think when I think about the last presentation and we saw Guru on the screen a bunch of times, right? I'd be curious how many times we could look at the logs for Guru and someone started their prompt with, "Hey Guru," right?
Yeah.
Or at the end of it, they said, "Thanks," or "That's not what I was looking for, help me find this, Guru,"
Yeah.
right? And so we're at this point where the technology is very personified, right? I don't open up Outlook, I don't open up Excel, I don't have a cute name for it, right? But I have a cute name for every one of these AI applications and then workflows that I work with. And that trust is incredibly important. And I think the only way we get there a lot of ways is through explainability, right? The AI has to be accountable for the information it provides. I think to your point, the data is always suspect, right? It could always be poisoned or intercepted or any of those kinds of things. But the explainability of how you got to that answer and then the willingness within the system designers to incorporate improvement and feedback so it self-improves, I think is critically important as well.
So that last point, capturing the feedback is so essential, I think, because as I was saying before, these folks, boots on the ground, they know that the data is flawed. It's not telling the whole story.
Yeah.
How do we capture that tacit knowledge, that expertise, especially when you have an aging workforce in shipbuilding industry, for example, people who are rolling off? How do we capture that knowledge? And some of the tools that are being developed today enable us to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about moving these ideas then into production. Anyone who has not had the pleasure of moving pilots to something in scale within the Department of Defense is really missing out. Right, it's a cathartic, it's a patience level of experience, slightly more difficult than choosing your own parents, I promise you. It is a challenge to take an idea that is shown at some level of ingestion like a pilot is normally, to scale, scope, affordability, good testing, and then moving that. So you've got everything from the idea of trust in the application itself. You've got the funding that would go along with that, given the cycles. You have policy that's involved. Some of it's helpful, some of it's very prohibitive for moving things either quickly or at all. And then we have this insatiable desire to move people every 7 minutes. So the turnover for continuity makes it really hard. So there's a lot of strikes against you in moving these ideas and staying with it. Tom opened up when he talked about what the future is going to look like in a few years. But if you go back and take a look at the bets that we've made, both in industry and in the department, 8 years ago, 5 years ago, how many of these applications are even still around? Because again, they've gone through all kind of perturbances with people and change and the like. So what are some advice about taking these ideas, capturing them, and actually moving them into a way that we can employ them successfully? I'll open up the floor for that.
Yeah, I think when they started talking about prompt engineering and capturing different responses to find best practices is something that we really have to get at. So one of the things we do throughout all of DoD is we all have our policies and our technical orders that we embrace, and they are ours and our kingdom, and we shall not allow anybody else to touch them. But as we go into AI and our users are interfacing with our policies and procedures, we can start looking at commonality between failures in policy or required changes, and we can start capturing and really just NASCAR the way that we expand our policies, change our technical orders, and kind of take that requirement off the end user of coming up and writing a piece of paper and saying, this is how you should change my policy. And as we do that, our policies will become way more effective, but it's a place that I don't think we're capturing yet, and we certainly need to get at it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a great point. Policy, to the extent that we can get further to the left and make policy changes, that is great. For me, the big thing that I see in my engagements is we got a whole lot of people who are, in some cases, constrained by policy, and they're just trying to do their jobs in the best way that they can. So we just need to recognize that we have a whole lot of different people, different roles, different responsibilities. They're all trying to do their jobs in the best way that they can. So just listening for a bit and understanding where they're coming from, because in some cases we will see a roadblock. I can tell you cybersecurity has been a challenge along the way, right? It's been what could be perceived as a roadblock for us. Those are just professionals trying to do their jobs in the best way that they know how to, and in some ways under the constraints of policy. So just having that kind of discussion and understanding what's important to them in the role that they're in, and figuring out how do we work together to overcome some of these challenges is going to help us accelerate along the way.
Mm-hmm. So I'd maybe add one other perspective too, and sometimes it's a little contrarian when I share it, right? At Microsoft, we get a privilege of working with companies and organizations of every size, type, industry, all over the globe. And we look at all of these learnings to try to understand how people are adopting technology, and specifically AI. And I think one of the things that we've learned at the end of the day is that there's a lot of shiny object stuff. I love that term when Tom uses it, by the way, when he builds that chart in the beginning. And there's this need to invent new ways of thinking about injecting change into an organization. And when you kind of peel the layers back on it, there's really not, because we're all people, and people fundamentally haven't changed like our cultures and our behaviors over the years, like what makes us tick, right? And so when we think about AI and sort of diffusion and scaling from pilots to production, a couple of themes kind of jump out, right? One, you need strong executive leadership and sponsorship, right? It's got to drive down through an organization, even as large as, say, the department is. You then have to have champions, right, and excitement, and people that want to advocate from the bottom up. So we look at the story we just heard about, hey, look, all of us together, we could get together and build this great application or field this application because it fills a particular mission need. And then sort of that middle there is all the different types of learning, adoption, skilling, all those kinds of words that get thrown at the problem for how people get comfortable with change and how they adopt that change for the outcomes that leadership is driving them towards. So I hate to boil it down sometimes like that, but we're all people at the end of the day, and those are kind of like best practices that really do fundamentally work. Exactly.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I will just say that in an optimistic but cynical way, I think it's going to happen no matter what. It's just the different perspectives in this room, who ends up being where and where in the stack and what it looks like, but we're on our way. And I think there are visionaries, drivers, leaders, champions that are going to get there. You know, think of the Air Force model, the OODA loop and John Boyd. You know, he was a voice in the wilderness at the time, but he fundamentally changed the way that we think about warfare. I think AI has the potential to have that type of impact, but trying to decide which policies and which leaders and which technologies, which shiny objects are going to win is very hard, but it's going to happen.
Excellent. So let's talk about something a bit different. Let's say the assumption is made and we're on the road march in a at least satisfactory way to onboard this technology. Having been a multiple term CIO in my recent past, one of the challenges is receiving something, whether it be a bright shiny object or something very exciting, but not having an adequate infrastructure to employ it properly. So it sits siloed. I often try and describe this as taking receipt of a beautiful Ferrari, having it delivered in the middle of a muddy field. If there is no road on which to drive it, no maintainers for it, no way to really exercise the way it's built by design. If you think about our aging infrastructure, poor security habits and processes, air gap systems, multi-classified enclaves to move these things around, and the most important piece, the need to push this at the edge, especially if we're talking about warfighting. Reach-back models are dead. Having the information in a relevant area, processed properly, with deciders deciding in the areas they need to be effective, all of these things have to happen. So there's other investments that have to be made to ensure that AI applications can thrive in their environments. So thoughts on what you think needs to change or what leaders need to think about in the onboarding of this critical technology?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, going back to the shiny object, we build these and we don't look at the foundation of our data. We all throw that out there as, hey, our data is no good, but I think as leaders onboard these new AI solutions at the very early stages of development, there needs to be a data integrity piece so that those push predictions that we're going to want people to rely on and make mission calls on are as accurate as possible. So I see a lot of AI development and the cool new fancy flashy things been done, but the underlying data is still not as correct as it could be. So developing a data integrity right from the beginning so that we can rely on the AI to do those mission edge decisions is critical.
Yeah, I'll just say, I think we heard earlier, I think it was Tom who said, DOD buys 1 billion gallons of fuel per year. How much capacity, fuel, do we have in the form of our data? And how large are the tanks that we've invested in and the ability to move that fuel around? We don't think twice about the amount that Congress spends on fuel because you just have to have it. I think the only way that we're going to successfully deploy these new technologies is to start thinking about the networks, the cloud infrastructure, the resiliency required to deliver this capability in terms of course, you've spent all this money on a Ferrari or you've spent all this money on a fighter jet. You got to have the right fuel and the right maintenance, and everything goes along with it. And I think that's starting to emerge as generationally we become mature and start understanding the demands of the technologies that are needed to maintain superiority.
Yeah. for me, I feel like I'm beating a drum over here. It's still a people and organizational kind of problem. And what we have been trying to do over at HII is strengthening the collaboration between the CIO team, the CTO team, different missions. We fundamentally have to talk with each other, align on what our priorities are, because that's where the money's gonna come from, right? We have to agree that this is what's most important to the organization, and everyone is trying to accomplish their siloed kind of mission. So to the extent that we can continue to come together, close those gaps, and figure out where the right investments need to be made, the better off we're gonna be.
So if you think about this idea of no siloed approach to this, there has to be some level of a conductor or someone who looks at the larger picture to make sure these things aren't just applied by individuals. So, I'm thinking of countless examples of these decisions being ceded to the more technical side of an organization when policy is written by a different side and purchasing is happening like the Wild West. So there really is no operational design from start to finish where these pieces are. I think that's how we've ended up with so many bifurcated systems. You can just acknowledge, if I look at the crowd here, anyone even tried to find data, right? We start an exciting project and someone says, yeah, we've got that. Well, go ahead and, like the fuel example, turn on the spigots. Let's start collecting them. And what do we learn? We don't know where our data are. We can't find it properly. We find out that there are no APIs on the systems to move this data out of the siloed areas that they lie. We have, copyrighted and protected, licensed and privileged information caveats that go along with some of these things, which means we might not be able to share them. So we have a lot of houses not in order. So to me, I look at the call to readiness. And the reason I think that question is so important on looking at it holistically, especially for this audience, if you have any influence in your environment, it's not just about the application. It's about where that application is going to live and run and succeed, all the way from its production to its user consumption and all points in between. And if those chains are broken, it's a very frustrating, unfulfilling experience. And I agree with your comment, Peter, on it's coming, right? It's, great, good Marine Corps adage is it's going to happen with or without your cooperation, but it will happen. So I think that idea of understanding could really help us prepare and be ready. So we are down to our last waning minutes, and I believe what would be our final question. So this one is a free-for-all, kind of a jump ball here. Take a look at your own crystal ball, and with what you feel comfortable sharing to the audience, if you look out there in the next 3 to 5 years, what do you see in the realm of AI, technology, and anything else that we've either discussed here on this panel or on previous panels or speeches? What do you see in the future that you spend some critical time thinking about?
Yeah, for me, and I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about a project that I worked on with C3, since this is a C3 event. We worked together to create this generative AI maintenance assistant. And I've been out there communicating with various Navy stakeholders along the way, demonstrating the capabilities of the product. It's just having that co-pilot that makes the jobs of maintainers on the front lines easier at the end of the day. I think having that kind of assistant, it's the human-machine teaming where we have our people who have the deep subject matter expertise. We have the machines that are capable of processing vast amounts of information in a short period of time. Bringing those two together, finding the synergies, and taking advantage of the strengths on both sides is where I see this going. I've had so many people on the Navy side who see this kind of capability and they just latch onto it. It's like, yes. having that kind of capability in hand would be a tremendous uplift, accelerator in the way that they do their work.
Yeah, and to launch off that, so I look at the 3C AI Guru product, and I get excited as a maintainer because I know at some point AI is going to get to the point if I'm on the flight line, I'm going to be able to type in where is that part I need, or why can I no longer get that part, where has the supply chain failed me. And whether you're a maintainer or you work in medical or your security forces, in the future we're going to have that type of generative AI capability where we are just closer to the data and those abilities to make those decisions. And so fewer people at a conference table with their own PowerPoint presentation, because now everybody can get to the data and they don't need them to come to the table with an individual PowerPoint.
Yeah, I'll jump in with my final comments, maybe 3 quick ones. The first one is the impact that AI will have on code generation. So our ability to impact those that are building out software, I think is going to be so significant that our speed to applications, our speed to systems, speed through ATO will all be greatly accelerated. And that's going to really have great dependence on what Master Sergeant Haskell said, which is that REACT concept, right? Reasoning in action, where because of investments that we have in the foundational models and C3AI is making, that the reasoning is not going to be governed by humans doing those great flow charts that govern how we do things. We're going to be able to depend on agentic AI to build those out. So everything's going to be faster. And if we do that right, I believe at the edge and at the mission edge, what we'll see is an autonomic response capability, because humans will not be fast enough to make decisions in response. So it's not going to be about who can move the data to the comm that fast, because the commander is going to have a few choices. He or she's going to have to hit play on a scenario, and then the model is going to have to update that scenario, and the commander is going to have to decide, do I play out this scenario or that scenario? It's not going to be decision making. No. It's going to be more figuring out which model and which scenario are you betting on to hit play on. But in order to do that, we need to get the first part right.
Yeah, so 3 to 5 years, by the way, like my crystal ball starts to get pretty cloudy and murky, but I still love the question and the framing of it, right? But I think maybe there's 2 things that come to my mind that I'll add to the other thoughts that the panelists have shared here. I think first is maybe building on the coding idea. I think we're going to see a significant shift in the way that applications are fielded and designed, right? Some are admittedly software nerd by trade, right? Like you want to sit down and nerd out over stuff, and let's do it. But when we think about the way you define agents with models right now and enable them with tools and give them access to data through things like MCP and enable those agents to collaborate across frameworks like A2A, we really end up with a world that looks like there's a series of models, there's a series of infrastructure, there's a series of data, and you sort of have this canvas in the front, right? That is your user interface for interacting with all of those things below. And the ability to generate all of that code, and a lot of times, I think what will be near real time will fundamentally change the way that we think about building and fielding applications, and hopefully, my double fingers crossed here, right, are going to address a lot of our underlying data problems and issues that we have. I think the other one that's super exciting for this audience is this sort of convergence, if you will, between what we're seeing in model development and the real world in robotics, and particularly around autonomy. And so I think there's been a lot of work around autonomous systems to date. It's sort of been traditional machine learning, some rules-based types of things, pressing play on scenarios. I think as we see more robotic-enabled models that have sort of world reasoning, world understanding, we're going to see incredibly higher levels of automation and autonomy in systems.
Well, excellent. I am 37 seconds away from the clock expiring, so we have done quite well. If you would please join me in thanking our panelists for their keen insight and their honest answers.